Hello everyone, we are the Mananalitsi group from GLIT PH White 25, and we all welcome you to our podcast about domestic violence titled as Speaking Through the Bottle Full of Smoke. To start off, let's introduce our members.
Hi, I'm Justin James Bilaos.
I'm Ryan Jefferson ko.
I am Saila Mayel Manongtong.
And I'm Liana Hyacinth Bong.
So first of all, let's start with the summary of the literature muna on what our literature is all about. So our literature is titled Bottle Full of Smoke, written by Jose V. Montebon Jr.
The story begins with the scene of Mamerto beating his wife, adding Soling with a leather belt. The wife, exhausted amidst the beating, recalls the first time where Mamerto's fists landed upon her cheeks as she declined the request for money by her husband. She gasped at the moment his fist hit her, not so much from the pain it inflicted, but from the unexpectedness of such action from her husband. Going back into the present, a horrified Roberto watches as his mother gets continuously hit with a leather belt by his father.
Earlier, during a particular afternoon, a gloomy Roberto had just lost one of his hens who had escaped from him. His drunk father arrives at the dinner table, also bringing in a dog that he bought from his friend who was about to butcher the said dog. The temperamental father then asks his son to give some food for the dog, and the dog growled at Roberto whilst he tried to put out his hand to pat it. His father decides to slap the dog, indicating that the dog is timid if his son knows how to control it. Roberto is then asked by his mom to light up the lamp. Then he observes that the smoke becomes sitting inside the near empty bottle when he lit it. He asks his mom regarding this phenomenon, and she replied that the smoke passes through the wick. He wondered again, thinking that the smoke always goes up, to which his mother replied that there is almost no kerosene left in the bottle, and that the smoke cannot go out, although it wants to, since the wick is blocking it.
The next morning, Mamerto insisted for his son to give the dog a bath in the nearby river, giving a name for the dog, which is now called Dominante. He's a brave dog, his father said. Roberta tried to pull the dog into the water, but to no avail, straining to break loose from the rope. Roberta picks up a bamboo stick near him and scares the dog into submission by threatening to hit Dominante. He tried to keep the dog in the deep water, believing it to be brave as his father implied. He smiled as the dog whined before him, helpless. His neighbor, Mang Tasho, made a sudden appearance, and whilst talking to him, the dog escaped from his hands. He made it back to their home, seeing his beat-up mother crying on a corner. He saw Dominante lying over a pile of rugs and dirty clothes, and decides to pull it outside to punish it for adding to his mother's burden. But as he was about to hit, he thought that his mother would yet be the outlet of his drunk father's anger for that night if he saw the wounds on it. He returned to the house whilst leaving Dominante tied up to a tree, but unpunished. Where is the dog? His mother asked. Him on the breakfast table, to which he replied that he left it tied on a tree. His mother then asked what he did to the dog, to which he lied, saying that he beat the dog in order to fulfill the will of his mom.
Mamerto returns to the house late in the evening, frustrated that he lost his money on a bet. Deluded that his wife is smiling at his misfortune, he decides to beat her using his leather belt, while the frightened Roberto in his bedroom tries to drown out the screams of her mother using a pillow. Hours pass when his sobbing mother sat beside his mat, to which he attempted to comfort. Roberto wakes up in the morning as he meets his bruised up mother in the kitchen. She tells him that the dog ate their fish for breakfast. Roberto then dashes out of the kitchen. After a while, he returns to the dining table, wherein his father asks his mom whether there is any additional food for them. She tells Pamerto that the dog ate the fish. The father then asked Roberto angrily about the whereabouts of Dominante, the dog. The son answered softly, I killed him.
So, after the summary, let's discuss naman about the characters in order to get an in-depth view regarding them.
So let us start with Mamerto the father. He is the head of the family. However, despite being the padre de familia, it is observed in the text that he relies on sabong or gambling to earn money. This is his way of earning easy money, but nothing comes easy because, of course, there are risks. So when he loses, he also consistently beats his wife, Soling. Due to his violent nature, the other members of the family are scared of him and would be at his bidding. He is one of those types that relies on such easiness, such as gambling, that pag it doesn't turn their way, it will like affect others. So in the story, he represents the bad habits that stems from suffering a poor economic condition within the family.
So, let's proceed naman with the mother, which is named Aling Soling. So, she is the wife of Mamerto and the mother of Roberto. She constantly receives abuse from her husband and is unable to go against his word. So, she takes parang the role of the mother of the family. However, parang palagi din siyang binubugbog ng kanyang husband and she's often subversive lang to his words.
So the third character naman is Roberto, which is the son of the family. While he doesn't receive any physical abuse from his father, he is aware that his father beats his mother rather, especially that he can see her bruised mother in the mornings. He even witnesses like the main assault. He also received a dog from his father, which his father named Dominante. His character may be seen as the one who will be like influenced by his father and possibly develop an abusive behavior in the future, as he witnesses uh, domin- uh, domestic violence in their home. He was even taught by his father to discipline his dog by assaulting it or hurting it.
So now let's discuss Dominante. Dominante, as said earlier, is the pet dog the father brought to his son. He named it Dominante as a symbol for dominance. Dominante was disciplined by Roberto, however, in the form of hurting it by a stick or beating it by a stick, and even tested his endurance and ferocity. However, this led to the dog almost drowning. Uh, in a point in the story, it is also mentioned that Dominante was left among the guava trees after Roberto thinking that the dog only adds to the misery of the house, and it and even said by the end of the story that Roberto killed Dominante.
So, let's proceed naman to the argument of the story or what can we think from it. So, we could see that the characters can represent the Filipino as a whole din eh. So, starting with our first argument or as what I could think of it, the poor economic conditions of a family greatly contributes to its culture of violence as we could see from the story since medyo mahirap yung yung family na naka-frame dun sa story.
Wait, so like if you think about it, how will a family solve its problems when their economic condition is actually the problem?
So, as we could see from the story, the father acts as the provider and the focal point of a family, but he fails to meet their basic need or at least their basic needs in the family. So, hindi natin na-discuss in the summary about yung the first instance and the discussions that happened between the mother and the father. But he actually asked Aling Suling to give him 5 pesos. I guess presumably in order to gamble it since parang wala na rin sila masyadong pera nun eh. And then nagalit din si Aling Suling since wala rin siyang pera. So Filipinos often take pride to the idea of being a proper padre de familia to their family. As such, failing to provide the basic necessities might make them more insecure about their abilities as a father.
So in line with that, I think monetary problems get more aggravated by the culture of gambling. Like for example, pagsasabong, because like financial problems or economic standing of their family plays a role or becomes a factor to domestic violence. As the father becomes upset since he does the work, he may try to entertain himself through gambling, like pagsasabong, as I've mentioned. His mood may be influenced by this, like if he wins or lose. And for the worst part, the mother becomes the outlet of his violent instances when he gets mad.
Ayun din. So, gambling are a big problem din in our culture since it doesn't really benefit the Filipino people. And statistically, halos you will never win from any gambling situations talaga. And mostly the money goes to the whoever parang organizes the entire gambling ring.
In addition to gambling, we can see that Mamerto, the father, is uses alcohol at a lot of times. He goes home drunk a lot of times. So vices such as alcohol is used by the father to mask his failures in life, as we can say. He uses alcohol to forget his problems, and as such, due to the influence of alcohol, he gets more violent and abusive to his wife. Uh, Aling. And since he spends his money on alcohol, this greatly affects their economic conditions, wherein instead of using it on daily necessities, he uses it on alcohol.
Parang instead of parang investing ito na business, parang nauubos lang din dun sa bisyo niya yung parang money nila. So, instead of parang getting out from their economic condition, parang mas lalo siya na-aggravate din.
Like instead of using that money rin to yun nga, like make a business, he uses it more to gamble. Tsaka like in turn, nabibit yung wife niya kung natatalo. Or tsaka another argument rin is when the culture of violence is passed or forced upon someone and not something that arises from oneself. Like imagine yo if you have a kid, how can it develop violent if like young lang sila? And how will they learn something when wala silang example na gagayahin?
Yeah, parang namamana talaga yan eh. It doesn't really arise from the kid alone. And there are often examples na nakikita nila which are examples of violence. And mostly parang yun lang din yung nakikita nila in their everyday life since it is also aggravated by the poor economic conditions na which is the cause of the violence then mostly by the father or their parents. So as you can see from the very first part of the story, the father teaches his son to discipline the dog by hitting it. So, makikita natin na parang yung father kamo yung nag-aano, yung tuturo sa bata that discipline can only be instilled upon an animal by hitting it. So, it implies that he could also do it to other people to discipline them. Parang masama yung ganitong idea, pero yan yung ini-imply ng father to the kid.
Another thing siguro is the distorted idea of bravery, which the boy tried to test to his dog to like know its endurance and ferocity, but almost resulted to the drowning of the dog in the river. As such, it is ingrained in our culture that enduring may be a symbol of bravery, but it can be inferred that Roberto may view bravery as enduring the beating and abuse of their father. Although he's not the one who's being abused, but he witnesses how his father abuses his mother. So another thing is because sometimes we tend to glorify struggles or pain as just a challenge or struggle or pagsusubok sa buhay to the point that it develops for worse, leading to abuse or a more dangerous domestic violence.
Yeah. Filipinos often take pride talaga to the idea of bravery. Like, pag nasasaktan ka, parang it makes you stronger. Pero in the grand scheme of things, parang mali talaga yun eh. Like, enduring may be a symbol of bravery, but it doesn't necessarily imply that it is good in the long run since it also scars the mind of the people. Parang yun na lang yung natatatak eh. Like, when you get hurt, parang it implies na brave ka na. There are other types of bravery, parang bravery din kasi. It's not just about the physical aspects of it.
Another another thing is that the part wherein the killing of Dominante the dog by the hands of the boy to avoid his getting his mother blamed. Roberto, the child in the story, is constantly exposed to the violent actions that his father does to his mother. Wherein we can imply that he finds this abusive action as normal in their everyday life. While he gets scared from his father to because of these actions. However, he takes the idea of abusing lightly. As such, he thinks that killing the dog is justified since uh killing the dog um will avoid getting his mother blamed. However, it's not directly or explicitly mentioned in the story that he did kill. He just said it. This can be also interpreted that Roberto spared the dog of the abuse that he can get from his father due to making a mistake.
So let's discuss yung mga symbolisms naman that are present in the story. So one of the prominent symbols na nakita natin is living dominante among the guava trees. So bakit ba niya iniwan to?
In the dialogue, now you know why I'm crying. That dog adds to the mystery of the house. It is not enough that your father beats me when he comes home drunk. Dominati was seen as a hindrance or an added problem to the household, in which the effects was taken upon the mother. Roberto asked his father to sought for a solution in which he decided that violence was the key. Like, since namanan din niya sa tatay niya na parang, oh, dapat parusahan or like, i-hit yung dog to avenge or I don't know, like, for the sake of the mother, he decided that he should hit the dog. But in the phrase, he raised the stick to strike, but it was suspended in midair, as if a hand reached out and held it back. The thought of his father coming home drunk in the evening flashed in his mind. This idea was short lived, as instead it is overruled by fear of the violence from the father, which may be caused by the violence he would done to Dominante. Like, since he said that violence was the key for the mother to feel better, yet he got scared because naalala niya na baka like once he sees the dog, he'll hit the mother again and again, and nothing will just change. So, as seen in this, the violence is continuously spreading from one generation to the next, that it became so prevalent that it became an outlet for those oppressed, where the only way shown in the story to stop said violence was the fear of receiving violence from another.
So for our next symbolism naman, we could see that Roberto told a lie regarding the dog dun sa latter part ng story, wherein he told that he beat the dog but he actually didn't. So the lie shows that people subjected to violence think of violence as a form of retribution, in which Roberto could not tell his mother the truth as he knows that doing so will not change the outcome. He termed his father to be cruel and merciless. As such, the lie was said for a feeling of retribution for the violence received by the mother. So he actually lied. Parang he lied in order to protecting his mother since if he told the actual truth, um, parang yung nanay din yung ano parang sasaktan ng tatay since he also wants to parang ayaw niyang masaktan din yung aso in a way. which is kind of ironic since sinasaktan din niya yung asawa niya.
So the next symbolism is kind of related to that as well, because the other symbolism is when Roberto said he killed the dog. So there are two possible conclusions as to whether Roberto really killed the dog or not in the end. So the first one is that Roberto might have just hidden Dominante and did not really kill the dog. This is because it can be seen that he was already feeling guilty when he realized that if he hurt the dog, his mother might be beaten by Mamerto if he saw the dog wounded and got mad. It can be observed in this particular line. Did you kill him? No, Nanay, no. The answer was spontaneous. What did you do to him then? I beat him, Nanay. He felt a surge of warmth spread all over his face. He had light. And the second possibility is that the dog really was killed by Dominante, as either to stop its further sufferings or he has already been influenced by his father and adopted a violent behavior.
I would just like to add that in the second possibility that we can say that Roberto indirectly killed the dog because he did left him tied in the guava trees. Meaning, unless someone noticed the dog and enticed him, or the dog tried to escape and successfully did it, he did kill the dog, just not right away. But eventually, he would, since he would, I don't know, how siya magugutom siya ganon and everything. His needs would not be provided. Uh, so now let's head on to to what the title means. The bottle full of smoke. The characters in the story have touched a bit on what the title means. As they have explained, the bottle is full of smoke because it has no kerosene. The smoke is unable to get out even though it wants to because the wick is stopping at the mouth. My interpretation of the title is reflected on how the characters are trapped on the abuse of their father or the culture of violence. They are scared of him, but they are unable to do anything about it. They have no kerosene or the courage and privilege to go against the flow or to go against what their household is like. They are aware that they are suffering, however, due to their poor economic situation, having no one and nothing to rely on, they cling to Mamerto in order to survive. Despite the misty amount he gets money from gambling. As such, they are trapped in a never-ending cycle of abuse.
And last but not least, Dominante. The name Dominante is given by the father to their dog. This name reflects how the role of their father is in their family. He dominates on any aspect of their life, unable to go against his words, always at his bidding. As such, Dominante could be seen as an outlet of the son receiving its violent acts, and the mother may also see herself as Dominante as she witnesses how her son disciplines the dog. It's like how if the father would vent out his losses, he would beat the mother, the same way of how Roberto would vent out his anger of his father beating his mom to the dog.
So in addition to that, I think like if she doesn't see herself in the dog, then it's either she doesn't want the dog to experience any more sufferings, just like how she is experiencing pain and struggles, like in her everyday lives. Like she doesn't want anybody to experience it. Like it can be um seen or observed in this line. Like there on top of a heap of dirty clothes and rags lay Dominante. His body covered with brown earth. The dog saw him, but he did not move. Roberto took the rope in his hand and yanked the dog from out of the soggy mass of clothing. He jerked the rope so violently that Dominante howled in pain. His mother turned to him when he stepped into the kitchen. She did not speak, but her tear-strained eyes seemed to say, "Now you know why I'm crying. That dog adds to the misery of this house. Is it not enough that your father beats me when he comes home drunk?" So it's either she sees herself in the dog or she doesn't want anybody, even the dog, to experience pain as she was struggling with. And it might have been that she also sees how the father, Mamerto, influences his son, Roberto, in doing violent acts as to where they term it as disciplining the dog.
So, as we can see, as an addition to this, parang we could see that the abuse that Mamerto is giving to his wife is also mirrored on the abuse that, or at least the possible abuse that Roberto could have been given to the dog then. So we could see that the wife regularly gets beaten while Roberto is still parang tinkering on the idea of abusing the dog, which he already started by trying to drown it to the river. Pero hindi rin kasi niya tinuloy at the very end. Or either one of the possibilities could have happened to the dog then, as discussed earlier, which in which he could have killed the dog or he could have just set him free in order to escape from the abuses. Um, just to add regarding the author, so the Palanca awardee Ian Kosokot writes that the stories that Montebon penned in his youth are deeply moral tales where he pits his protagonists against very difficult choices. He succeeds mostly because he refuses to give us definite answers to these moral dilemmas, preferring instead to immerse the readers in the moral complexities only to hold back to make them reconsider their own decisions as to what should, what must, and what could happen. So, as we can see from his story, we could see that he didn't really end the story in a definite way. He gives the readers a choice on whether Roberto killed the dog or he set him free. And then just to lie to his father regarding the fate of the dog. So we could think either of these two ideas.
To wrap up our discussion, let's now proceed to the conclusion part of our podcast and then our personal opinion. So, for the conclusion, domestic abuse is a pattern of coercive behavior that people use to manipulate their intimate partners. In addition to threats and acts of physical and sexual violence, it also includes financial, emotional, and psychological abuse, as well as the other or all the abusers' use of any privileges they may have in order to maintain control and authority. With that being said, we can infer that the family's violent culture is heavily influenced by its poor economic circumstances. Aside from that, it can also be observed that violence is not something that develops on its own. Rather, it is transmitted or imposed upon someone. This is depicted in the story with how much the father influenced his son, mainly through disciplining Dominante, which is their dog. Now, let's go to the significance of discussing this issue and the takeaways of each of the members.
So starting with the significance, well, for me, we can also see that the cultural aspects have an effect on our notion of domestic violence, which is represented by practices such as what we think about the idea of bravery in our Filipino culture. These ideas are ultimately detrimental for forming a healthy family relationship as well as with other people. This point eventually takes us to the idea where we question the relevance of our traditions and what we should bring forward and teach to our future generations.
So far, my significance and takeaways. The typical perception of the home is one of love, safety, and community. As a result, we frequently find it awkward to discuss how painful, unpleasant, and disturbing issues like abuse and violence regularly occur in the home. Knowing this, many people may have been experiencing violences, particularly domestic violence, and are just keeping silent about it. Even the story A Bottle Full of Smoke may be another family situation in the past or present because hindi naman malabong mangyari yung mga ganitong instances or issues.
Mhm.
Hence, it is important to tackle this issue not just to raise awareness, but also to understand its root, its consequences, as well as its pattern of coercive behavior to stop the cycles of domestic violence from generations to generations. I've also realized how great the effect is on children, especially if they are witnessing firsthand the abuses in their homes. What more if they're experiencing these abuses too?
For me, domestic violence is such a prevalent issue, not only physical but also emotional. In fact, I know few people who hate their family members. Like when I'm just browsing social media, I just see them ranting about how their dad is like this, their mom is like that. But I have this one friend in particular where she told me that she got abused by her cousins. Yet to add to what Silas said about keeping silent, she did keep it silent because in her words, like hindi naman daw niya alam na yun na pala yung nangyayari. So until this day, I still see her post stuff like how she hates men, like how like what happened that day was so unfair or unjust. As such, violence, even though it already happened in the past, may not be taken lightly, as the people subjected may still have the lingering trauma that still haunts them to this day.
So for me, similar to Ryan, to what he said, one of the key takeaways I can get from this literature and discussion is how our perception of bravery as a society affects our life. As mentioned earlier, bravery in the text was seen in the form of abuse, and enduring this abuse, it is even observed in our culture that we glorify all the suffering or pagsubok na nakukuha natin because some higher being is testing us. This is an important topic to touch upon since this kind of thinking may also lead to people if invalidating someone else's suffering and struggles just because they may believe that they endured and suffered more than others.
To end it, thank you for listening until the end. This episode talks about domestic violence in the context of the literature Bottle Full of Smoke by Jose B. Montebon Jr.